Voting Rights Act passed in 1965. Actually, there's a moving speech by Lyndon Johnson when he passed it. It's video 11 that I want to show you guys. Obviously, in 1965, we had a totally different country. And we still had the colored water fountains. The Civil Rights Act had just been passed. And it was a bloody struggle to get there. And that struggle was in mid-process. And there was the Jim Crow laws and voting by blacks were discouraged in 100 different ways in the South and other portions of the country as well. If you don't know, the Voting Rights Act, Section 5, also applies to some portions of California, New York, New Hampshire, Florida, etc. It's not just the South, and obviously Florida is to some degree in the South, but it is all across the country where we had a pattern of racial discrimination, and that's what Lyndon Johnson was fighting back against.
Today is a triumph for freedom as huge as any victory that's ever been won on any battlefield. They came in darkness and they came in chains. And today, we strike away the last major shackle of those fierce and ancient bonds.
So that's very powerful stuff. Now, people say, hey, listen, the country's changed a lot since 1965, and of course it has. Now, we wish that it had changed more, but just in this last election, we just saw that there was an attempt to get minorities to vote less through voter ID laws, etc., with the non-existent issue of voter fraud. In fact, one of the counties that's been trying to do it quite often is Shelby County, Alabama, who brought the case to the Supreme Court that the Supreme Court heard today. And Justice Sotomayor pointed out the irony of Shelby County, Alabama, bringing this when the Justice Department had to regulate back in 2008, which is not that long ago, telling them that they were doing racial discrimination again, where they had done a new scheme there where they wiped out all the black legislators in that area. What a wonderful coincidence that turned out to be, and that was ruled illegal. So they're a little hurt about that. Now, you have to understand that as recently as 2006, when we had the Bush administration and totally controlled Republican Congress, the Voting Rights Act was reaffirmed for the next 25 years, and the vote wasn't even remotely close. It was 390 to 33 in the House, and the Senate, it was unanimous. When has that ever happened? 98 to nothing, right? But today, when the Supreme Court was deciding whether that was unconstitutional, by the way, the same conservatives who say, oh, judicial activism, you can't overturn what Congress said. Look at that, 98 to nothing in the Senate, right? They're like, we're going to overturn that. We're going to declare it unconstitutional. Based on what? So now, of course, Scalia says, God, let's do judicial activism. He said, oh, democracy. He justified getting rid of that vote or not paying attention to that vote by saying, hey, listen, the Voting Rights Act has such a lovely name. Which politician is going to vote against that? So, democracy. I don't believe in any of that crap. So obviously they felt they had to vote that way, even though they must feel otherwise. Really? Well, they had a funny way of showing it since it was a unanimous vote in the Senate. Perhaps, Justice Scalia, people are not quite as racist as you are, even the Republicans during the Bush administration. To give you a sense of how racist Justice Scalia is, he called the Voting Rights Act, quote, a perpetuation of racial entitlement. He said that in court today. Now get a load of his perspective. He thinks black people having the same right to vote as white people is racial entitlement. Now he's been entitled to vote in any damn way that he pleases all his life. But when minorities want to have the same rights, there they go again, wanting their rights, entitlement. Unbelievable. Sotomayor challenged the plaintiffs in the case. She said, do you agree with that characterization that it's a racial entitlement? They're like, they tried to avoid it once. She repeated the question, and they're like, well, I wouldn't phrase it that way. Even Shelby County, Alabama wouldn't put it that way. And they're the ones who brought the case. All right. Now, you know we're in trouble because Chief Justice John Roberts also said, quote, is it the government's submission that the citizens in the South are more racist than the citizens in the North? Because Section 5 applies more to the South, although it is across the country, as I said. And I have an easy answer to Justice Roberts' question. Of course, the South is more racist than the North. Doesn't mean that there isn't tremendous racism in the North. and that it isn't institutional. It doesn't mean that everybody in the South is racist. It doesn't mean that things haven't gotten better. But is it a surprise to you that Alabama and Mississippi is slightly more racist than the rest of the country? Well, if it is a surprise to you, then you'll be shocked by these numbers. In this election cycle, in 2012, during the Republican primaries, when they asked likely GOP voters, now it's not the whole state, it's likely Republican voters in those states, should interracial marriage be legal? 21% in Alabama said no, it should be illegal. Interracial marriage. In Mississippi, an insane 29% of likely Republican voters said that interracial marriage should be illegal. Gee, I can't tell, Justice Roberts. Is there a little bit more racism in the South than there is in the North? Come on. It doesn't mean that everybody in the South is guilty. It doesn't mean you should assume they're racist. That's ridiculous. But has there been that history, and does it remain more so there? Obviously it does. So it's something that we should look out for. Now, Sotomayor also added, quote, some parts of the South have changed. Your county, I should say, pretty much hasn't, referring to Shelby County. Under any formula that Congress could devise, it would still capture Alabama. I think that's hilarious, because she's pointing out, look, you were the most recent violator of this law. So of all the places in the world, we should cover you to make sure that you don't discriminate against black people. If we devised any law, it would include Alabama, and specifically Shelby County. But we're in a world of trouble because Justice Kennedy, who's probably the deciding vote, said, quote, the Marshall Plan was very good too, but times change. In other words, he's saying, racism, schmacism, that was in the old days. Times change. Voting Rights Act is in a world of trouble, about to go down, it looks like, based on at least the questions and the comments by the justices today. And NBC's top legal correspondent, Pete Williams, agrees. He says, quote, I think it's safe to say that there are 5 votes to strike down either one or both parts of the Voting Rights Act. So it was nice while it lasted. Look, it's not to say that our situation in this country in terms of race hasn't gotten better since 1965. Of course it has, right? But if you think that it's mission accomplished and that there are no more racial issues, you just simply have not been paying attention to what's happening in this country. You haven't been paying attention to the numbers and to the actual efforts of places like Shelby County, Alabama, to make sure that blacks do not vote in the same percentages that whites do. That's why oftentimes the black districts will have longer lines. That's why they do the voter ID laws, because 25% of African Americans in this country don't have photo IDs. And that's the whole point of those laws. So in fact, if you think about it this way, if these guys didn't want to discriminate, why would they bother bringing this lawsuit in the first place? Why would the Voting Rights Act bother you if you didn't have a plan to discriminate against minorities in voting? It wouldn't bother you at all, right? Because you never run into that issue. The reality is it bothers you because you'd like to be free to discriminate. And Justice Scalia and the others look like they're about to help you.